In March 2008, New York Governor Eliot Spitzer was entangled in a sex scandal that rocked New York State.
Spitzer's successor, David Paterson, was inaugurated with his own extramarital affairs scandal.
August 2007 found U.S. Senator Larry Craig with his pants down, soliciting men in an airport bathroom.
In 2004, New Jersey Governor Jim McGreevey had an affair with a male employee, spurring his immediate resignation.
Sensitive news topics like these require extra care from the journalists covering them. If covered the wrong way, these stories can easily be seen as sensational and tabloid-like, focusing more on juicy gossip rather than the hard facts. St. Louis priest Father Mario Ross was shot and killed while in Knoxville attending a conference. After the initial story of the murder was printed, Knoxville newspapers reported that anonymous police sources leaked that sexual paraphernalia was found on the priest's body. They reported that a ring designed to enhance sexual performance was found on the priest. Before he was shot, he had spent time in a bar frequented by prostitutes, and that his pants were unzipped when he was found. A Yellow Pages listing of adult bookstores was also found with him. This news broke the day of Ross's funeral, and it became apparent to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that because of its impact on the community, this story had to be covered carefully. The final story began with details of the funeral, then the Knoxville information, and finished with more on the funeral service. Due to a space issue, the original ending, a prayer for the priest, had to be cut. Also, the story was placed on page 3A under the title, Funeral Mass is Held for Slain Priest. Once the story was printed, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch received heavy criticism from the community who still found the Knoxville information to be unproven.
To examine the ethicality of the decisions made in this case, we chose to use the Potter Box method. The Potter Box was created by Ralph Potter Jr. to aid in the decision-making process of cases involving ethical dilemmas. The model consists of 4 interrelated steps: facts, values, principles, and loyalties, which are described by Potter as being common to all ethical dilemmas. The first step, facts, lays out all of the morally significant details of the case. Values, the second step, are what you consider to be most important in the case and influence the decision-making process. Principles, the third step, are the ethical philosophies you can use to justify your conclusion. And the final step is loyalties, which is choosing who or what you have an allegiance to.
Facts. A priest was murdered in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was found with sexual paraphernalia. The story ran on the AP wire. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran the murder story and funeral coverage as one story on page 3A. The final story was 25 paragraphs, 7 of these on the Knoxville information. The original ending, a prayer for the priest, was cut from the final draft. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch received heavy criticism from the Catholic community.
Values. Credibility. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch had to worry about their professional reputation, which influenced them to run both stories. Community. The community has a right to know all the details of the case, even if it will upset or anger some members. Truth-telling, because the truth is the backbone of the journalistic profession. Reputation of Father Ross. Father Ross was a well-known community figure who was loved by many.
Seek truth and report it. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch had to inform the public of both Father Ross's funeral while also avoiding sensationalism and overt emphasis on the sexual nature of his death. While both news stories were already in the AP wires, the Post-Dispatch still went ahead to validate the accuracy and truthfulness of that information for themselves. If the Post-Dispatch had decided on only reporting Father Ross's funeral, they would be telling a half-truth and consequently covering what was going on. Minimize harm. Keeping in mind that they had to report on the controversial private matters of a well-loved yet public figure, the Post-Dispatch did what they could to minimize harm by writing the final story in a respectful and sensitive manner. Be accountable. Those at the Post-Dispatch were also accountable for their actions by recognizing their obligation to the public, pursuing truth aggressively, and presenting the news accurately, in context, and as completely as possible. Aristotle's golden mean defines moral virtue as the midpoint between two extremes. As the midpoint between the two extremes, the Post-Dispatch decided on reporting both the funeral and the news out of Knoxville, but didn't make the story front-page news and focused more on the priest's funeral while dedicating only several paragraphs to discuss the details surrounding his death. Mill's utilitarianism is defined as the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The Post-Dispatch tried to balance the funeral and the controversial details while taking into consideration the Catholic community's feelings and reactions.
The newspaper first and foremost had a loyalty to the field and profession of journalism. As journalists, we are supposed to seek truth and report it. Withholding any information would be violating one major component of the job. The paper also had loyalty to itself. They wanted to retain credibility and maintain the trust of their readers. The AP wire already had the information and had run the story, so if the paper decided not to include the controversial information, readers could eventually find out anyways. Loyalty to the public, especially the Catholic community, is where much of the controversy and decision-making lay. On one hand, the paper wanted to respect the image the Catholic community had of their priest, but they also needed to know this information about a figure they had looked up to. In a way, it is better and closer to home to read this information in a local paper rather than to see it plastered on national news. In a profession where many do not follow the code of ethics, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch closely adhered to many guidelines laid out by the SPJ. By running the story on page 3A, the newspaper avoided making the story seem sensational. The paper acted ethically by reporting the truth, but taking into consideration the sensitive nature of the story and the feelings of the Catholic community.